Okay. Tommy, before we start talking about the monster that is conflict, let's kind of get all the systems going so we're actually streaming appropriately in LinkedIn. I just wanted to check in with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well,
Yeah.
and thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah,
Getting the
second
year off to
conversation.
a good start, and looking forward to a good 2025. Hope you are too.
Yeah, you were in Boston. Was there any snow?
Yes. There was a little bit of snow on the ground, but it was very cold.
Yeah, how'd you handle that? Being a North Carolinian, how'd you handle the cold?
Not bad. I'm a native New Jerseyan, so I grew up with the cold, so
Yeah,
I
I don't
managed
know.
okay.
I'm nervous going to Albany, dude. I'm just
Yeah.
nervous. I saw 2 degrees, and I'm like, I don't even know how my body's going to deal with that.
Yeah, we're going to Montreal in February, so
Yeah. That's not fun.
no, I think it'll be cold, but I'm looking forward to it.
All right, I think we give it enough time to warm up here. We're going to jump into the monster that is conflict. Tommy Ray, Vital Communications, expert presenter, writer of the Power of Presentations book. You can check him out at Vital Communications. He is with me today in this LinkedIn Live. We did one recently on the leadership side of things. Now we're talking about conflict.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about this thing being a monster, right? And then I was in my writing there, I was saying monsters can be good, can be bad. It's not necessarily a bad thing. What are some of the things we should know or talk about or think about before we dive into this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is some definitions. We should put some definitions around conflict, talk a little bit about productive conflict. I think we have to also think about what I like to call the 4 awful truths of conflict, which I'll share here in a minute. And then a couple other things like perspectives and perception and punctuation are all important aspects of conflict. So maybe just starting with a definition would be good. Any situation where your concerns or desires are different from someone else's is essentially conflict.
It's a difference.
So you can see that there's so many places in our professional life and personal
life, right? So there's a difference.
Absolutely. So that difference is, that's conflict. Now, there's some aspects of conflict that we want to keep in mind because they're really important. One is it's inevitable. Conflict is inevitable as
Come on, it's not inevitable. I'm going to start interrupting you. I'm going to start talking over you. It's not inevitable. Come on.
No, absolutely. Conflict is inevitable. You have desires that are going to be different than other people in your workplace periodically, in your family life, your home life. It doesn't have to be destructive.
Isn't it better if everybody just does what you say?
Oh, I love that. Right? Who has that much power? No, it's not. That's not actually.
That's not reality. The reality is there'll always be some type of difference.
Yeah. And conflict can be productive and it could lead to really good outcomes, productive outcomes. Like if everyone agreed with you, you probably wouldn't make the best decisions possible.
True.
You wouldn't deepen relationships and maybe get to know people's point of view and perspective better, right? You'd maybe not develop a greater appreciation for them, and you wouldn't be able to see things from a different perspective if we didn't have.
So basically, what we want to start thinking about here is that conflict doesn't have to have that negative connotation it has, which then draws in those negative emotions, which then makes people want to stay away from it.
Yeah, indeed. There's definitely a mindset component. If we have the mindset that conflict is always going to be painful, then we're probably going to want to avoid it.
Yep. And then we avoid learning. Then we avoid experiencing new things, new perspective.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why one of the reasons why we might have that negative connotation around conflict is we've not been in situations where conflict has been handled well.
Yeah.
So our experience tells us this is dangerous. Another reason is we may fear that we lack the skills ourselves to really be able to have productive conflict.
Yep.
So we step away. Those might be some of the reasons why we have that perception. But David, I think that there's some things that we have to keep in mind, that there's always risks and costs associated in conflict.
Yep.
And the damage that occurs in conflict is from the use of dysfunctional strategies. When we don't do conflict well, that's where the damage comes from. It doesn't come from having different points of view or different, approaches to things. It really comes from dysfunctional strategies that we use when we're in conflict.
So let me tell you about, let me ask you this question about, it's kind of a little off the beaten path on it, but
sure,
there is going to come a time where that difference doesn't get settled in the work environment.
Right.
So what are some tactics or thoughts you have about not making sure that doesn't stay destructive?
Yeah.
So is it a situation where sometimes you just have to accept when the final decision is made, and that's got to be part of your ethos? Maybe you want to think about and change your perspective on it, but you might not be able to. So what are some of your thoughts there? You're in conflict, you're following the right techniques, but you just reach a stalemate.
Yeah, I mean, that's challenging, right? When you disagree with someone and you can't have resolution. So, right, we're generally looking for conflict resolution.
Yep.
And that's integrative and collaborative. We have to cooperate in order to get that. Sometimes we don't get it, but we have other options for managing when we're in situations like that.
Okay.
One, some of it is our own responsibility to manage our own emotions and our own mindset. You use the word kind of accepting that there's sometimes in organizational life, there's things we're going to have to accept that, we would maybe have done it better or done it differently rather. Or we feel we would have done it better, but we have to accept that. But the other thing is we can use some other conflict strategies that might be helpful. So sometimes we can look for a compromise, rather than just competing.
Yep.
Or if we're trying to cooperate and that's not working, maybe a compromise.
So conflict and negotiation have some connectors.
They do a lot, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like when you get to that stalemate, the first thing I was thinking about as you're talking here are legal methods. Like if you get in a conflict in a marriage, you get divorced, right?
Right.
You get a conflict at work, you can leave or you can sue. I mean, but all those things, sue, divorce, leave, they all cause a lot of negative externalities, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the important things to understand about conflict as well, is that there's interdependence, and the level or amount of interdependence that people have, changes the dynamic of conflict, right? If you and I are working together on the same team, we have a high degree of interdependence. It's going to be difficult for one of us to constantly compete, right? Rather than cooperate. And so we want to be mindful of that. If we're in a negotiation buying a car and we have differences, we can walk away. It's a lot easier.
Yes, it is.
And it is. Yeah.
So kind of let's go take a step back, and because we've gotten some really cool things there, but I think we could tie it into the sources of conflict.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I was thinking as you were talking is that when you start getting into conflicts on goals and values, there's some heavier challenges there. So give me some thoughts on on where the sources of conflict are.
Well, usually in organizational life, much of the conflict is from facts and information. Some people have some of the facts. Maybe they don't have all the facts, or we're disputing the facts. It could be on methods, how we do something. You think we should use this approach to our marketing plan, and I think we should use this approach.
Yep.
Sometimes we have different goals, and sometimes we see this between interdepartments too, right? Yep. How many times have you heard sales and operation have conflict?
Yeah,
because maybe they have some
different views of the world,
right, and different goals, and then values, of course. Now that's where, as you pointed out, it gets really challenging. Yeah, when we have values, and we see a lot of that in interpersonal, in romantic relationships, and
we also see large transformations. I mean, where you're doing a large digital transformation, or if you're doing, a reworking or a business reorganization. I mean, that happens a lot, and people have to start making decisions about whether they can stay because of the adjustment in values.
That's right. That's a good point. And organizational culture, things like that really can play into that values where conflict can be, the source of conflict can be values.
So the interesting about the facts, right? The facts and
Yeah.
information. I mean, you have some distortions there. Like you have you have confirmation bias distortions that
Right.
people can have. We're moving into a society where maybe the truth isn't as important as it once was. Influence and opinion are tied to that. Any suggestions on that as it relates to conflict around information, given some of the things we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important is to remember that we may not have all the facts all the time, and just check ourselves to see if we have all of the facts. There's a really interesting little part of Fierce Conversations. There's a great book where she talks about, if you show someone a part of a beach ball that's got a certain color, they only see that color, but on the other side of the beach ball, there are more colors. So if you ask them what color it would say blue, but they don't have all of the facts. Sometimes we just don't have all the facts. And I think we have to.
Don't you get into that concept of perspective then? So when I listen to you talk and when we kind of go back and forth, really, at the end of the day, it's everybody's perspective can be different on any one of these four things, right? Perspective on the methods, perspective on the goals, perspective on the information. And, talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talk a lot about when we're working with people and helping them work through conflict is doing a perspectives analysis and really mindfully trying to understand the other person's perspective, because it's a great technique in helping work through conflict. So asking questions like, what might the other person's goal or objective be here? What might they be feeling? And what might I anticipate or expect in a confrontation? I don't mean that in a negative way, but when we get together to talk about the issues that we disagree on or having conflict over, what might I expect? And try to put yourself in their shoes, right? So everyone's trying to understand. Perspective taking is really, really big in helping to navigate conflict.
Do you have companies that you're talking to now that are actually thinking that and actually trying to teach people perspective taking?
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those skills that we really need to consciously practice.
Yeah.
And so when we work with them, we create case studies and we do role plays and ask people to start to take on the other person's perspective and examine their own as well, right? Where am I coming from? What am I feeling? And that's another important aspect of conflict, right? Self-awareness, understanding your own emotions. That's really big as well. And one thing that we talk about all the time is being a good listener. And that's hard.
The thing, it's really interesting. The perspective thing really gets to me because there's no way you're going to get through the conflict without trying to understand how the other person is thinking.
Right.
Because if it's all focused on you, I mean, to me, that's an unbalanced negotiation.
Right.
It's not a negotiation in good spirit. So it's not a conflict in good spirit, right? It's just about me. So you need a tool by which you can understand the other, and that's can you see what perspective is, and then can you try to find that? And then one of the things I talk through is the idea that your brain processes things differently.
Right.
You and I have a completely different perspective on what we're doing right now.
Right.
Based on how your brain processes what I'm saying, based on how my brain processes what you're saying. It's an interesting part of it, and it's fun, it's great to.
Yeah, and I think we have to ask good questions too, to uncover what someone else
is still operating. There we go. We had a little bit of a glitch. I think we're back. So now let's go with, you talked a little bit about emotional intelligence now. So the initial reaction to this seems to be like a little bit of emotional hijacking when you start running into a conflict situation. So talk a little bit about that. Because we all know that happens, right?
Absolutely. That's a great point, right? So when we're in a conflict, right, when we have one concern or desire and the person we're engaged with has a different one, a number of things can happen there. One, we could feel like a goal that we have is being blocked.
Yep.
So there's a sense of frustration.
Yep.
So, right, that's emotional. There's
and I talk about frustration being a gateway to all other type of emotions. Like then you get into anger and how do you peel anger apart to find the fear?
Yeah.
And then that gets back to perspective. Like, can you see someone's fear? But keep going.
Yeah. But that's exactly where I was going with the perceived threats that are associated with that frustration, that goal frustration, or the way the other person is acting. We may perceive it as a threat. It may not be a real threat, but we might perceive a threat to our status.
Yep.
Maybe to our certainty, autonomy, our relationship, our relatedness,
even
and
to
fairness.
livelihood.
Those are David Rock from the Neuro Leadership Institute, the SCARF model, right? Yep. Status, certainty, and autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And when we feel a perceived threat in those areas, we can become defensive,
yes,
emotional,
yep.
or depending on our personality and our work style, we could withdraw. We're going to have that fight or flight response, and it might be flight,
or it might be. And in a session I've done recently, someone says they freeze.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was interesting having that person talk through their freeze response, given initial engagement with conflict.
Yeah.
So one of the things I talk about is time, right? So you get into this idea of self-awareness and self-management. How does time help from your perspective? Like how does time help you protect yourself from emotional hijacking?
Well, I don't know about time protecting from the initial emotional hijack.
No,
right? But after that, so I think, there's a lot of chemical reactions that are going on.
That's right.
Chemical processes going on in your body. And sometimes just the time to allow those chemicals, that adrenaline, to dissipate a little bit can be really helpful. I mean, I think, Greg, growing up, you probably heard count to 10.
Yeah.
It makes sense because
also you got to think, right? So the key here is how do you go beyond just your emotional reaction to begin to really think logically about and rationally about the situation. Yeah. And under emotional hijacking, you're going to just really do protection. Yeah. You're going to do whatever it takes to, that's what fight, flight, freeze, fawn is, right? It's a protection mechanism, right?
Absolutely.
Your brain isn't processing about anything other than to protect.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's the challenge when we have the fight or flight response. The rational thinking part of our brain doesn't function as well when we need it the most, when we're having a really challenging situation.
Precisely. So, and then maybe time is tied to understand that you can adjust your schedule if you're not prepared to deal with conflict.
Right.
Or you can not respond if you're not prepared to deal with the conflict, to give it time.
Yes.
There's some of these simple techniques like don't send the email out until the next day.
Right.
Cancel the meeting and reschedule the meeting when you feel you're in appropriate self-management state to handle a situation.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, that makes sense, right?
Yeah. Even simple things like breathing, having a couple of good breathing techniques, especially right at the beginning when you feel like you're being triggered. Having the ability to kind of catch your emotion before your response, and maybe, again, taking a moment, doing a breathing exercise. And then you brought up another point, David, that I think is really important, is that we also have choices in conflict.
Yep.
We don't have to engage in the moment, like you said. We might use a strategy of delaying and avoiding for a while until we feel more capable of having a challenging
or even thought about it, right? Because how can you, if you're engaged, right? Something hot comes to you,
right?
And you engage hot, you have no way to analyze the perspective of what the hot came in. Right. Yeah. Even though it may have been inappropriately addressed to you, right? If you give time to think about it, then you can open up your mind to the perspective and then you might take another angle at how to communicate based on, well, okay, I can see why they're mad. They're mad because they're fearful of getting their bonus because they don't think I'm doing my stuff and I'm not going to get the project delivered on time. So let me take a step back, work in that fear, and try to talk through all the stuff I'm doing to get the project to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. And then again, with the choices, we often talk about the Thomas Kilmann conflict handling modes.
Yeah, talk about that.
Because it helps us remember that there are a number of different ways to manage conflict. Mm-hmm. And they're really helpful, right? And the model's, very well known and very often used in helping people understand conflict. And so the x-axis is cooperativeness, right? How willing you are to be cooperative. I like to call that the relationship, essentially. Mm-hmm. The y-axis is assertiveness or your agenda. So the model has five different styles. When you're low in cooperativeness and low in assertiveness, that's the avoiding style or the delay, when you might need time. It might be appropriate sometimes. We wouldn't want to use it all the time.
Well, I also think avoidance is you don't even engage it at all.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I do talk to people that one strategy of avoidance might be it's not worth the engagement. Like someone mm-hmm. comes to you and starts venting. Their conflict is they're agitated, they're angry. Maybe you just need the vent. Do you need to engage that conflict?
No, I mean, I don't think you need to engage it are they coming at you with something like a complaint about you or something that you're doing?
Complain about the situation, maybe?
The situation. Yeah. Right. That might be.
I mean, sometimes in a relationship, the partner just needs to vent. They're frustrated that you haven't done this and they know you try, but they just need to vent it out.
Yeah. I mean, so I think it's always good to give people the opportunity to, to talk about how they feel. They don't have to act out their emotion, but to talk about their emotion and say they're frustrated, say they're upset,
and sometimes people don't want the problem fixed. They just want to talk about it.
Well, that's true. But if you are in conflict and you need to work together to get some goal accomplished, then you might need to go to the next step and then have a conversation about it using some of the things that we've talked about here, right?
Makes sense. Okay,
perspective taking, listening, empathy, the ability to clearly articulate your own point of view, right? That's important because that's one of the things that differentiates verbal aggression with a good argument. And I use that word in a healthy way, right? Having a good discussion about different points of view, different approaches. Sometimes it just spirals into verbal aggression, and that's no good. So
the thing is, sometimes somebody has to work it out within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my thing on the conflict side is around avoidance would be, I guess I wouldn't use the word avoidance. I would maybe go back to use time. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm using time instead of avoidance. It's the fact that maybe if you engage it too much, you're putting fuel on the fire and it's just going to get worse. Maybe they just need time to process it. Why don't you go back and think a little bit more about it? Let's not talk about this right now. Maybe you come back with another perspective and there's no need for an engagement.
Yeah.
But you can disagree with me. That's what part of this is about.
I mean, I think that's a really good to give people time and space to do it. I think the danger is just not resolving something that could be resolved and letting people's emotions just kind of maybe stay with them. If someone comes back and says, gee, I overreacted there, that's different, right?
Yeah.
That's
but if you don't get any response back, then that you do have a responsibility to re-engage that conflict.
Yeah. Or at least get to a place where you can work productively together without letting the conflict interfere with the goal that you're trying to achieve.
Trying to move forward.
I saw, Todd mentioning in the chat there, teamwork is huge now. Yep. And so the level of interdependency is high in the workplace.
And there's no that competing, like you're not going to get a boss to come down and and kind of break up the fights.
Yeah.
The positional concept of just do what I'm telling you to do, shut
Yeah.
up, excuse my language, but that's just not as prevalent. So
Yeah.
you have to work out your situations.
Right. Right. You don't want to have that use of power, that kind of a use of power, because ultimately it's not going to be very productive for people's levels of engagement
Yeah,
and
right. They would
their
just
levels of
psychologically-
satisfaction at work or even problem solving. So
Yeah.
that's not great, but managers do play a role, I think, when there's conflict on their team. And one of the things that they can do is to, I think, help encourage people to work things out together.
And
of
that's
course,
a tough part because sometimes people go to the manager and bypass and then the manager tries to be the middle person. They really shouldn't. The two parties should be able to come together.
I think that what happens that's even worse than that sometimes, David, is people triangulate with other people who are not the manager and someone else on the team, and that sets off a very bad cycle of interpersonal dynamics. Sometimes they do have to go to their manager if they feel like they're not capable of solving the problem, and the manager can help by modeling really good conflict management behaviors, doing some training for the team on how to handle conflicts that come up, setting the expectation that it's always good to work with your partner, your teammate, to resolve conflicts, bringing things to one another directly in a safe environment. The manager can also set up the whole culture of psychological safety on the team. And I think that becomes an important part as well. And sometimes they have to arbitrate or mediate, right? Sometimes that'll happen.
I mean, so the interesting thing when you start getting to some of these specific challenges at work is that there's so many interconnections, right? So when you look at conflict, we've talked about emotional intelligence's interconnection associated with it. We talked about negotiations, interconnectiveness to it. We talked about communications and its interconnectiveness with it. So, if you just take conflict in and of itself, I mean, it sounds like one of the most important things is to try to teach people that it's not as scary as they think it is.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. We want to remember that productive conflict can lead to really good outcomes. So let's have a healthy mindset about it. I think we have to check in with our own skills and our own willingness to do things like perspective taking, listen, be empathetic, make sure we can articulate what our concerns are in a way that's clear.
That's it. See, I think you really hit this. I think the perspective taking tied to empathy is the critical skill set in conflict, because if you really want to resolve conflict to move forward, you have to be able to take a step to understand the other side, from somewhat of an empathetic position, to be able to then foster a process to get to the other. And also you have to suspend the need to get everything done your way. And that's a tough one because we don't teach that either. I mean, we don't teach people that you just can't have everything you want in the work environment.
Right. Yeah. And that's really important. And I think sometimes we overlook that maybe people don't really think consciously about that. But
I don't think they don't. I think
we got to learn how to play in the sandbox. I hate to use
but that's not a
it's
bad
true,
thing. It's not a bad thing to use.
We have to collaborate. We have to learn how to collaborate and value.
Well, remember, Tommy, society talks about maximizing yourself.
Yeah.
So if you're always told that you have to maximize yourself, you have to protect yourself.
Right.
What happens is that it's driven by self, and then you start losing the ability to practice perspective taking and take an unselfish picture of the overall surroundings.
Yeah.
Because then you think you're weak. It's a vulnerability factor.
Right. Right.
And nobody wants to be vulnerable at work if they're trying to maximize me.
Yeah. So I think that's why good leaders are so important, because they're setting the tone in their organization of what's healthy, what's good, what can help us, innovate and grow, work well together, be engaged, satisfy our customers. All of that comes from a culture where people get the best ideas they work effectively together. And leaders have to set the tone there,
It's
and helping their employees and their staff and their teammates learn to deal with the inevitability of conflict, and the way we handle it is an important part of their job as well.
and my push is also going back to the individual and saying, if things continue to flatten, you have to lead yourself. You have to lead within the locus of that work, just like you talked about, like Todd talked about, in the team itself. You have to take that responsibility. If you can't, then you can't rise to the occasion of these adaptive work environments and rapid change and flattened organizations. And it's just going to be very difficult for you.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I mean, it's been a great conversation. Any last thoughts on your side, young man?
No, I just think, where we started, it's big. Conflict is big, but it can be productive. And if we learn the skills and we apply them and we do some self-reflection, we can make it productive.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Tommy, for your time.
Thank you, David.